cool. Let me just excavate some antique crumbs out of my mustache. All right, you ever heard of Bloodworld by Laurence Janifer? You ever heard of Laurence Janifer? Bloodworld was originally published under an alternate title, You Sane Men. I've had a lot of curiosity about this book because I kept running into it here and there at used bookstores. I've sold probably 5 copies of it over the past couple years. And every once in a while, someone would leave a comment about how much they hated Bloodworld, or like it was a book that inspired a lot of strong opinions. Originally published 1968, and would you look at that? I am the final person who will ever read this copy, apparently, because it is just about to come completely unglued. This book rules. This book is so much better than I expected it would be. I picked it off the shelf because I thought, frankly, it would be a book that would be fun, a fun sort of mental break. I thought that it would be sort of gore, like GOR style, weird, like some dork working through his sexual paraphilias on the page. And I don't know, I thought that it would be like a little, I don't know, novelty. It ended up being, I think, one of the most serious pieces of science fiction lit that I've really read. And I don't know if I should qualify that with obscure science fiction or just science fiction generally. In the Patreon review, I compared this to Le Guin, which is some pretty significant praise, and it was praise that was tempered with some provisos of Janifer is not a very good writer, and that has been confirmed upon a closer squint at the work of Janifer. But he's kind of playing in the same ballpark. I don't know any baseball terminology. I just tried to pull what would be a good metaphor for like a second run player. I had an appetizer in my mustache. All I do is read science fiction, and I don't know shit about sports. So fill in your own normal person metaphor there. Anyway, the point being, Janifer is not really one of the big leaguers, but I think he possibly accidentally hit a home run. There we go. There's a sports metaphor. Finally got it. It's a book about an alien world that is a colony world splintered off of this equivalent to like the Galactic Federation from Star Trek, this allegedly sort of like benevolent, like democratic, procedural, like legalistic society based on human rights. And there's this colony ship that carries all these freedom lovers to this alien world to set up their own society based on their own values that center around the recreational torture of a slave class who they call the Bound. I guess I should probably say that this book, along with another one, get into some really heavy content. And the Bloodworld, they don't call it the Bloodworld, I don't remember the name of the planet, but that society is based around an aristocracy that maintains these brothel-like establishments called remand houses where they can go and order slaves to enact their malicious impulses on for the sake of like civic tranquility and social cohesion, so that the ruling class can work out their id, so that they can work out the violence in their souls. For what it is, it's amazingly thematically sophisticated. There's a lot of psychological depth in this book. There's a whole dynamic at play where there's like this really sort of sickening like paternal and maternal relationship between the elders in the society and like the younger members of the aristocracy. And there are many layers of sort of like domination and command. And those like social performances color the personalities of the people who are enacting their roles, all the way down to the slaves. And I think the reason why I do compare it to Le Guin is because it's an ambiguous dystopia. Dispossessed is called by her an ambiguous utopia. And there's something very similar to that, like a similar flourish, where there's not like a clear, easy answer of which form of social organization is more moral. I did say before, Janifer's not that great of a writer. I think in parts he is here, but he tends to be redundant, and he tends to write these like overstretched paragraphs, but it's sort of like thorny and sticky and muddy in a way, the book, especially sort of like on this frontier of thematics and politics, in a way that is above and beyond most science fiction that I read, even some of the like serious-minded, really critically lauded stuff. I think Bloodworld is sort of on that same level. I wish that it was better written so that I could give this an unqualified double thumbs up, you know, my beanie spinning around my head. It did at times. My beanie rotated a couple of notches here and there, and it's one of those books where it's hard to be quote-unquote objective about it in my criticism. Not that I ever really aspire to objectivity, but it's one of those books where the thrill of discovery and the glee of surprise may influence some of my, like there may be a slight rose tint to my view of the book. But I think this is one of those sleepers that I love finding because it's basically invisible. One thing that I will say is that there's a lot of violence in it, and it's fairly uncomfortable, but it doesn't go over the top. It doesn't get gratuitous. It's just like disturbing enough to give it emotional stakes, but it's not so disturbing that it's like, I don't know, splatterpunky, or, you know, it's not torture porn. By the time I was done with Bloodworld, I thought, wow, what if Janifer is another Malzberg? What if Janifer winds up being another, like, generally neglected author, not just on the basis of individual titles? So I read the other Janifer book that I happen to own, The Wonder War, which is a big piece of shit, and Janifer, I'm hitting the button, I'm setting him down into the pits. I know that we've all read The Doom City by Boris and Arkady Strugatsky. This is sort of like if Doom City was written by a 12-year-old. It's from the 50s, right, I think. The basic premise here is 1964. Interestingly, actually, it's also sort of an inversion of the Federation from Star Trek, where what if the Federation had the inverse of the Prime Directive, where they were deliberately trying to thwart progress in alien cultures by way of using like espionage and subterfuge to prevent the outbreak of war in cultures on alien worlds where the technology is ramping up to a point where they are discovering atomic power in space flight. And war is the great engine of technological advancement. And therefore, if you can prevent war, you can prevent these people from becoming spacefaring and potentially challenging the authority in the long term of this galactic federation. I don't remember what they call it. So there are 3 intelligence agents stationed on this planet. And the planet, it's like a metaphor for World War II, very on the nose. There's one continent that is fascist, and the other continent is communist. There's a love interest who gets kidnapped by the fascists, and the protagonist winds up, through a comedy of errors, becoming a commissar in the Soviet continent. And it's very, very slapstick, broad strokes, political satire, very mired in 1950s Cold War, I don't know, dispositions. And it's written with that Heinleinian, like pulp, glib humor that it's like, you know the really fine thorns on cactuses that get in your skin and they stay there for a week? That's that kind of humor to me. Bad book, very dull, lost interest halfway through, just charged through to the end because it was so short. Hack work. Janifer maybe deserves his reputation as a hack who got lucky or pulled out the stops and decided to write something serious. But I don't know, probably maybe 1% of you have read more Janifer than this. I would be curious to hear what your assessment of his work is. And then the final book in this trio is Real-Time World by Christopher Priest, which is his original collection of short stories written in the early 1970s. It's interesting because it's like three different authors. There's the Christopher Priest that I know from Inverted World, the hard science, mind-bending puzzle writer who's very even-handed and sort of staid and neutral in his tone. And then there is a pulp Christopher Priest writing space adventures and much more golden age sort of like almost verging on space opera type material. And then there is a new Christopher Priest to me, another new Christopher Priest to me, who's just go for the jugular, die hard, like hard in the paint, dark, brutal, explicitly political priest who I prefer. That is now my favorite priest. I still love Inverted World, and I like some of the other stories in here, but I think the two or three standouts to me, two of the three or four, I will say, short stories in here that I liked the best were probably the two heaviest. Firestorm and A Woman Naked are both just brutal short stories. Firestorm is my favorite out of this whole collection, which I was surprised to find is not a popular opinion. Most people don't like the story. I think that it captured, in the 1970s, something that was rather prescient. It's a story about a commander in a military fighting a future war on a city where the civilians in the city have been evacuated into the hills, and all that remains is a token resistance who rig bits of infrastructure around the city to explode. And this official's responsibility is to await the order to destroy the city, and in the meantime, to be responsible for maintaining the maintenance of the infrastructure, of preserving the city in its current pristine, unexploded condition, in order that when the destruction order does come in, it will be a more perfect and beautiful act of demolition. I just found this story really moving and disturbing, and I think that bit of prescience, which is maybe commentary on Vietnam or maybe is just accidentally staring into a crystal ball, I think it captures something in this sort of like aloof, dispassionate, technocratic method of warfare that has become the standard operating procedure in the past couple of decades with like drone strikes and so on. I think that not just for that reason, but also just on its own merits, it is, I think, one of the most powerful little bits of science fiction writing that I've ever read. A Woman Naked is equally brutal. It's about a culture that punishes adulterous women by forcing them to go through the world nude for 3 months. Incredibly disturbing, brutal story. And I would say the final two stories, The Run and Real-Time World, are also excellent. I think The Run is so strange that you should just read it. Hard to summarize. And Real-Time World is pretty close to Inverted World. It's about like a research colony that's a closed system, and the research scientists in this station are being studied clandestinely by this intelligence operative who is feeding them like very cultivated specific news stories in order to see what happens when people live long-term in a world where they are closed off from like news input from the world outside. And it gets into a very sort of like Dickian reality bending thing. I think it's a brilliant little short story. Unfortunately, not all the material in here is to this level. The pulpier stuff I thought was not really worthy of Priest. Not that it was that bad, but it just felt like it was out of place. Breeding Ground and The Perihelion Man are the two that I'm thinking of. And the other ones I thought were forgettable. Head in the Hand, I think, is possibly a play on A Hunger Artist by Kafka. Really, another like pretty disturbing story. I just didn't really connect with it that much. Thematically, it shares a little bit with Firestorm. And Double Consummation, I thought, has not aged especially well. It's a hand-wringing dystopian story about declining population in the UK. That one was sort of a head-scratcher. Overall, certainly above average for a short story collection. And this, I think, is a pretty uncommon book. I looked online. The ones that I saw on eBay were like $50. I wouldn't spend $50 on this. I would find maybe the short stories that I recommended elsewhere online or in other collections or something that don't cost that much. Although it does have the, I think, Bruce Pennington cover. I have not substantiated that, and he's not credited in the book, but I think that's our boy BP. Anyway, decent little crop of books with one exception, and I was really pleased with Bloodworld. I think that was the best find. Consider, if you dare, signing up for my $5 a month Patreon. I upload about 5 videos a month that are long-form reviews of individual books. It really is just a second channel. I upload there very frequently, and it's good shit. IMO, IMHO. Think about it. See you there, maybe, or back here in, I don't know, maybe a week, a couple weeks. I'm reading so much, probably a week or 2. All right, cheers. Thanks for watching. See you soon.